Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological theories, in today's lecture, I am going to discuss about structural functional approach of Radcliffe Brown. Now, before we begin the lecture, it is important to understand that Radcliffe Brown was an anthropologist, but nevertheless, his contribution to understanding society from a structural functional perspective is significant in terms of understanding the contribution that has been done to sociology as such. So, let us try to understand Radcliffe Brown's contribution to structural functional approach. Now, before we try to understand who Radcliffe Brown was, what was his theory, let us understand what is structural functionalism. Structural functionalism is a broad perspective in sociology and anthropology which interprets society as a structure with interrelated parts. So, the entire society is seen in terms of parts which forms together a structure, and the relationship between the parts kind of contributes to the maintenance of the whole. Now, the focus of the structural functionalist is on structures, and structures are stressed and placed at the center of analysis, and social functions are deduced from these factors. That is to say that every structure has a function, and it is in terms of the relationship between the structure that functions can be interpreted. The structural functional approach was first developed by Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown and later adopted by sociologists like Talcott Parson, Robert Merton and Levy. Radcliffe Brown, he had started his career as a student of famous anthropologist W.H.R. Rivers in 1905. This was a time when the teachers was interested in histories of society. So the discourse in anthropology was more in terms of historical analysis to understand the evolution of society, specifically the evolution of primitive society, and they was to understand their conformity to history. Radcliffe Brown, as a student of River, was sent to study the history of Andaman Islands of India in 1906. It is his PhD postdoctoral work on Andaman Islands which got published later on and became the critical classical study for understanding structural perspective. Radcliffe Brown was assigned the task of reconstructing cultural history of the Andaman Islanders, who are a non-literate society. Now, if we were to understand this, was a common way in which anthropologists, mainly the British anthropologists, were trying to shape the nature of the discourse of anthropology, where it was assigned to study the other non-literate, non-Western society, and anthropology was kind of defined as a study of the other society. And within this framework, Radcliffe Brown was assigned the task to study the Andaman Islanders. In his book Andaman Islanders, published in 1922, Radcliffe Brown reflected the new insight he developed, structural understanding of social reality. According to Radcliffe Brown, social anthropology is the theoretical natural science of society. That is, the investigation of social phenomena by methods essentially similar to those used in physical and biological sciences. So we see the influence of positivist approach on Radcliffe Brown, where like Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, Durkheim, he was also trying to evolve anthropology where it's very close to the physical sciences, and therefore he was interested in observing certain generalized law, certain facts that could be used to understand the structures of the society. His study of social structure is basically the study of human society and not the study of culture. So it was both Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown who were in kind of giving us this new perspective of understanding society, but the difference between Radcliffe Brown and Malinowski was that Malinowski was in favor of cultural functionalism, where his focus was more on norms, values, the way it was practiced, whereas Radcliffe Brown was intended to focus more on the structure. And by structure, he was interested in understanding the relationship of association between individual organisms. So we see the influence of Spencer's organic analogy, where Radcliffe Brown, in order to understand structure, makes it reference to the organism and would be trying to understand human society as made up of parts and whole. Before he arrived at his theory of structural functionalism, Radcliffe Brown was critical of the theories existing in both sociology and anthropology, and those were theories which emphasized the prevalence of evolution and diffusion. So if we traverse through the evolution of sociological perspective, both sociology and anthropology, we see that it began with the idea of society evolving from simple to complex, and there was also the idea of diffusion. So one of the initial perspective was evolutionism, and then there was focus on functionalism. Now, according to Radcliffe Brown, the evolutionists were relying on conjectural history and have established theory of evolution on the basis of these pseudo-histories. So basically, the evolutionists would go back to the past to understand the present. Now, according to Radcliffe Brown, who was also in favor of ethnographic fieldwork research, was of opinion that there could be no way to go back to the past and study it. Therefore, the understanding of the past was pseudo. And the evolutionist and the diffusionist, according to Radcliffe Brown, lacked not only historical analysis but the conjectural history, which was pseudo-historical in nature. Radcliffe Brown rejected the evolutionist and diffusionist method of understanding society, and along with Malinowski, he started a synchronic functional analysis of culture concerned with the present and now, because as a sociologist or anthropologist, one could study the present society and not rely on whatever was historically documented of the past. Radcliffe Brown asserted on the study of society having a social structure. So for Radcliffe Brown, the structure was the focus of analysis. It was from the structure that function would be analyzed. And in opposition to Radcliffe Brown, Malinowski was more in terms of understanding the psychological or individual needs to constitute the integral whole of nature. So in one of the lectures, we have discussed Malinowski's contribution to magic, religion and science, where he talks about the functional necessity of each of these to understand religion as a social practice. Now, when we look into Radcliffe Brown's contribution, and we've seen that he was against the evolutionist and diffusionist and gave us a functional method to understand. Now, here makes a distinction between the historical method and the functional method. So, he mentions two methods for the interpretation of cultural materials, and the historical method, according to Radcliffe Brown, concentrates on the process of historical development of a culture. In other words, on how culture has come to be what it has. So it has evolved from, say, a certain kind of religion, kinship network, economics to a different kind over a period of time. The historical method is useful only when the society to be studied has historical records, and these records are kind of based on scientific study of the society. Now, in the case of primitive society, there are no historical record, and therefore this method was deficient or not sufficient to study in order to arrive at certain facts that could help to compare the past to the present. Therefore, he advocated the use of functional method for the study of primitive society. The functional method of interpretation, says Radcliffe Brown, rests on the assumption that culture is an integrated system. Each element of the culture has specific functions to perform in the life of the community. So when we, in one of the previous lecture in the series on sociological theories, I have discussed functional method, and there we can know that the functional method is a method which relies on the understanding of society as parts and whole, and each part has a function, and this function is positively done in order to maintain the status quo. Now, the functional method assumes that there are certain general laws of functions which are valid for all human society, and tries to discover and verify these laws with the help of logic scientific method. Now, there is a certain level of generalization based on universal laws of function. So, it is assumed that the family as a social institution functions to maintain the unity of the family, to socialize individual, to teach them the norms and values of the society. Radcliffe Brown sees this both method as complementary. So, the historical method and the functional method can be used together for the understanding of society. However, he was cautious of using only the historical method for the study of primitive society. Now, when we know the method that he applied a functional method to understand society, let us understand his study of the social structure. Now, we have seen that Radcliffe Brown focused on conditions which social structures are maintained. So, every society has a structure, and there are certain conditions that leads to the maintenance of the structure, which is also referred as the functions. He believed that there are certain laws that regulate the functioning of society, and therefore it is kind of understood that though society, the structure changes, there are certain integral elements of the structure that contributes to the persistence of the structure. He modified the idea of need and replaced it with necessary conditions for existence of human society, and these conditions, Radcliffe Brown believed, could be found out through proper scientific inquiry. He argued that the organic analogy should be used carefully. In a social system, the continuity of structure is maintained by the process of social life. He considers concrete observable fact as we find a number of individual human beings in a certain natural environment. According to him, sociologists and anthropologists can observe the act of behavior of individuals, their acts of speech, and the material product of their past action. The direct observation by sociologists and anthropologists reveal that these human beings are connected by a complex network of social relationship. Radcliffe Brown calls this network of actually existing relation as social structure. So, in simple word, in any society, a number of individuals coexist, and these individuals have a certain relationship among them. Now, this network of social relation is what refers to social structure according to Radcliffe Brown. If we refer to his definition, he defines social structure as primarily consisting of a network of actually existing relations among individual human beings by which they are connected to each other. And this definition of his structure can be found in his book, Social Structure and Function. Accordingly, the network of actually existing relation is subject matter for the study of social anthropologists, which could also be referred as comparative sociologists, because according to Radcliffe Brown, the sociologists are basically adopting the comparative method to understand the past and the present, the primitive and the advanced society. Radcliffe Brown advocated that social anthropology as a branch of natural science which discovers the general characteristic of those social structure of which component units are human beings. Now, when we look at his understanding of what is social structure, the next thing is to understand the types of social structure. So, according to Radcliffe Brown, the importance of social institution is that social structure is the arrangement of person which is controlled and defined by institutions. He refers to two types of social structure. The first is actual social structure and the second is general social structure. Actual social structure, according to Radcliffe Brown, is the relationship between persons and groups that changes from time to time. New members come into being through immigration or by birth or through marriage, while there are many members who leave the group through death, migration and other phenomena. Now, this shift of entry and exit of members changes the network of relation, which Radcliffe Brown calls as actual social structure. There are other phenomena like marriage, divorce, which are also part of the formation of the social structure. The second type of social structure, according to Radcliffe Brown, is the general social structure which remains constant for a longer period of time. So, the actual is constantly changing, whereas the structure which remains for a longer time, like family, religion and other, are the general social structure. Radcliffe Brown held the view that sometimes the structural form may change gradually or suddenly, but even though the sudden changes occur, the continuity of structure is maintained to a considerable extent. Now, when we look into the types of social structure, we realize that what are the components of structure. So, all social persons have a dyadic relationship. Now, dyadic relationship is like a kin relation between the father and the son, mother and the ego, which is the reference point in kinship, to the mother's brother. So, in a tribe, social structure is based on network of such person-to-person relationship established through genealogical connection. The second component is in terms of differentiation of individuals and class by their roles. That means differential social position of men and women as chief or commoner, employer, employee, as belonging to different clans or nation. In the study of social structure, Radcliffe Brown says, we are concerned with concrete reality, which is a set of actually existing relationship at a given point of time. Next, we try to understand the characteristics. He provides three characteristics. Number one, structure as actually existing concrete reality. It's not something which is a model or something which does not exist. It's actually there in society. Next, the second characteristic is that social structures can be directly observed and therefore studied by anthropologists and sociologists. And third, it has a structural form. Structural form in the sense that it can be subject to change, it can be subject to continuity. Above all, we realize that social structure has a continuity through time, which is dynamic and not static, like that of the organic nature of a living body. The structure of living organism is constantly renewed, and so is society. Social life, network of relationship is continuously renewed and maintained. So when we look through the contribution of understanding social structure, the types and component, we have a fair idea of Radcliffe Brown's structural functional approach. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.